Some people misunderstand time because they measure it like a countdown. And when you're 20, you think 30 is old, and when you're 30, you look at 40 like it's the edge of the map. And the funny part is, you only believe that because you haven't lived long enough to watch the map unfold. So your mind fills the blanks with fear, with stories, with borrowed opinions, with the voice of other people's expectations. And it all feels real until you hit the moment where the old framework stops working and you realize it was never about age, it was about awareness. When you're 20, you think life is intensity. You think life is speed. You think life is the loud part, the part you can post, the part you can prove, the part that gets you approval. And if you're honest, you're not even living for yourself yet. You're living for the reaction, for the reflection in other people's eyes, for the feeling that you're on track. Because at 20, you're still collecting permission from the world. And the world hands it out in cheap currency like likes, nods, invitations. You're doing great, and you don't notice the trap because you have energy, you have time, and you can survive mistakes without the consequences landing too hard. But the truth is, 20 is not the chapter where you find yourself. It's the chapter where you test the world, where you learn what happens when you say yes, what happens when you say no, what happens when you commit, what happens when you quit, what happens when you show up tired, and what happens when you don't show up at all, because you're building an internal library of outcomes. And every outcome becomes part of your instinct later. And this is why the men who waste their 20s don't just lose time, they lose the raw material their future self needed to become calm and precise. At 20, you can fail repeatedly and still wake up with a clean slate. And that's not a reason to avoid failing. That's a reason to fail correctly, to fail forward, to fail with awareness. Because there's a difference between experimenting and escaping. And most people confuse them. Experimenting makes you stronger, escaping makes you softer, and the world won't tell you which one you're doing because the world benefits when you stay distracted. So if you're 20, you don't need a perfect plan. You need contact with reality. You need friction. You need deadlines. You need responsibility. You need to be around people who move faster than you, smarter than you, cleaner than you, because that's how your standards get recalibrated without a lecture. And this is also where your body becomes an investment, not a toy, because your future is not just a mindset. It's your nervous system, your hormones, your sleep, your ability to hold pressure without leaking it. And whatever you normalize at 20 becomes the baseline you fight to change at 40. And if this hits you in the chest a little, if you recognize yourself somewhere in it, hit the like, not for the algorithm, but as a small signal to your own mind that you're listening now. And if you want more of this kind of reminder, subscribe, because some messages need to find you more than once. When you're 30, the game changes quietly, because at 30, you start paying the real price of your habits, not just in your body, but in your relationships, in your calendar, in your energy, in your tolerance for chaos. And you realize you can't do everything anymore. Not because you're old, but because your life has weight now, and weight forces priorities whether you like it or not. At 30, most people feel pressure, and they think the pressure is the problem, but the pressure is actually the mirror, because it shows you what you built in your 20s. It shows you whether you have skills you can lean on, whether you have a craft that pays, whether you have discipline that holds, whether you have emotional regulation or just motivation. Because motivation disappears the moment life gets crowded, and 30 is crowded for most people. This is where you stop being a collector of experiences and you become a builder of focus. And it doesn't mean you become boring, it means you become deliberate, because you've learned enough to know what doesn't work for you. And the most dangerous thing at 30 is pretending you're still 20, because the body and the mind will let you fake it for a while. But the consequences stack quietly, and then one day you wake up and you realize you've been negotiating with yourself for years. At 30, you also start noticing the invisible social contract. How much of your behavior is still shaped by wanting to be accepted? How much you still filter your thoughts before you speak? How much you still do things you don't even respect, just to avoid being seen as different? And this is where the mask becomes heavier, because it's not a playful mask anymore. It's the mask you wear to maintain your identity in front of people who knew the old version of you. This is where the concept of the persona becomes real, not as a theory, but as a daily performance. And if you've ever felt exhausted after doing nothing, you've felt the cost of that performance. Because it takes energy to hold a character together. It takes energy to stay consistent with what you once said you were. And it takes even more energy to change when your environment expects you to stay the same. There's a moment in the 30s where you see two paths clearly, even if you don't say it out loud. The path where you keep optimizing your persona to win approval, and the path where you begin aligning your life with something quieter, something more honest, something that doesn't need constant explanation. And the strange part is, the quieter path often looks less impressive on the outside, but it feels like breathing on the inside. If you're in your 30s and you're feeling that pull, and you don't know how to name it yet, comment, "I move differently," because sometimes you don't need advice. You just need to declare what you already feel. And if you want to keep your mind sharp through this decade, subscribe now, because this is where most people either become solid or they become scattered. And then 40 arrives, and if you're not prepared, you call it a crisis. But what it really is the end of pretending that the outside world can tell you who you are. This is why Carl Jung talked about life beginning later, because there's a psychological shift that happens when the first half of your life has done its job, when the research phase is complete enough that you can finally stop trying to be someone and start becoming whole. And the difference matters because trying to be someone is performance, and becoming whole is integration. At 40, you've seen enough cycles to stop being seduced by short-term highs. You've seen enough friendships change, enough trends collapse, enough big opportunities turn into smoke, enough people flexing lifestyles they can't actually sustain. And you start realizing that the loudest men often have the weakest foundations, and the calmest men often have the deepest roots. And this is also where the shadow shows up more clearly, not as a demon, but as a truth you can't outrun anymore. The part of you push down in order to be liked, the impulses you judged, the anger you swallowed, the ambition you hid, the selfishness you denied, the hunger you pretended you didn't have, and you can keep suppressing it. But suppression is not mastery. Suppression is debt, and 40 is when the debt collector knocks. Most people don't fall apart at 40 because they're old. They fall apart because they've been living out of alignment for too long, and the nervous system can only carry that tension for so many years before it demands resolution. Now here's where the mirror gets sharp, because this is exactly what trading does to a man. It doesn't reward your persona, it punishes it. It doesn't care about how you look, it cares about how you execute. It doesn't care about your self-image, it cares about your discipline. And if your identity is built on proving, the market will drain you, because you'll chase, you'll revenge trade, you'll over-leverage to make it back. You'll take entries that weren't yours just because you saw someone else posting wins. And you'll confuse activity with progress. You already know this pain if you've lived it. The late entry that felt like certainty until it snapped. The stop that hit and suddenly the chart was manipulated. The streak that made you question your whole method. The moment where you said you would wait for conditions and then you broke your own rule because you didn't want to feel left out. And the thing nobody wants to admit is that it wasn't the strategy that failed first, it was the nervous system. That's why the men who become consistent traders aren't the ones with the most indicators. They're the ones who can sit still, who can watch price move without needing to touch it, who can let a setup pass without feeling like they missed their life, because they're not addicted to action, they're addicted to precision. In the CLS framework, it looks simple from the outside, a range forms, the edges matter, manipulation reveals intent, and the entry is not a hope, it's a response to alignment. But the reason most people can't hold it is not because they don't understand the rules. It's because they don't trust the stillness required to follow them. And stillness is an identity, not a technique. If you're a trader and you felt that sentence land, hit like, because you're not here to be entertained, you're here to become unshakable. And if you want more of this kind of trading psychology through the hunter lens, subscribe, because repetition is what turns awareness into instinct. There's a type of trader who doesn't look impressive to the crowd because he doesn't need the crowd. He doesn't take 10 trades a day. He doesn't chase every candle. He doesn't narrate his life in real time. He doesn't need to be seen as smart. He needs to be effective. and effectiveness is quiet. He waits not because he's hesitant, but because he's selective. He watches how price behaves around key levels, like a man watching a room before he speaks. He understands that most movement is noise, that most opportunity is bait, that the market gives you infinite chances to betray your plan, and only a few chances to execute it cleanly. And when conditions align, he acts without drama, because the decision was made before the click. This is not discipline as effort. This is discipline as identity. And the difference is everything, because effort is temporary, but identity is stable. Identity doesn't argue with itself. Identity doesn't negotiate every morning. Identity doesn't need motivation to do what it already decided it is. The hunter-trader doesn't romanticize intensity. He respects routine. He respects boredom, because boredom is where consistency lives. And consistency is what compounds not just money, but skill, confidence, emotional neutrality, the ability to take a loss and remain intact, the ability to win and remain humble, the ability to be wrong without spiraling into self-hate or ego repair. And this is why the best years of a man's life can start after 40, because after 40 you finally have the ingredients that matter. The pattern recognition built from experience, the clarity built from mistakes, the emotional control built from consequences, and if you set it up right, you also have the health foundation and the financial structure that gives you freedom of movement, not fantasy freedom. Real freedom, the kind that lets you choose. People who don't understand this will keep talking about youth like it's the only chapter that counts. But that's because they never built anything that could mature. They never planted seeds worth watching grow. And then they blame time for what was actually a lack of alignment. You don't need to fear 40. You need to fear drifting into 40 with no self-knowledge, no standards, no craft, no routines, no system, because then 40 feels like the end. But when you've done the work, 40 feels like the beginning of operating with precision, and that's why it's different. Some men never make this shift. They stay trapped inside the persona forever, polishing the mask, chasing validation, reacting to every opinion, and they call that life. But it's not life, it's performance, and performance is exhausting. The men who do make the shift don't announce it because they don't need to. You can see it in how they move, how they speak less, how they choose more carefully, how they stop explaining, how they stop competing in games that don't pay them, and how they become harder to manipulate because they no longer need approval to breathe. Once you see this, you don't unsee it, and after that, it becomes hard to move the old way, because the old way is loud, and you can feel how much energy it wastes. So if you're 20, don't waste the fuel. Use it to build contact with reality, to learn yourself through action, to protect your health like it's a weapon, and to gather experiences that sharpen your instincts. If you're 30, stop pretending you can do everything. Choose a direction, accumulate depth, build pillars, and stop negotiating with habits that you already know are stealing your future. And if you're 40, understand that the door didn't close, it opened, because now you can finally build from the inside out, not from the outside in. And the second half can become the best half, not because it's easier, but because it's yours. If this resonated, comment "I'm Hunter," not to prove anything to anyone, but to mark the moment you recognized yourself. And if you want more of this kind of calm clarity, subscribe, because some paths close quietly behind you, and it's better when you don't walk them alone in your mind.